to this story here. If you did not see the Soho Forum debate between Glenn Greenwald and Alan Dershowitz, I thought it was pretty base. And I'm not exaggerating when I say Glenn Greenwald destroyed Alan Dershowitz. He really did. But you don't have to hear that from me. You can see it here yourself. This is a part of Glenn Greenwald's opening statement. Let's go ahead and bring this up here. Oh my God. I really don't think Alan was ready for this one.
Quote, I had dinner the other night with the Shah of Iran's son, the crown prince of Iran, the man who would turn Iran into a democracy if the people of Iran were allowed to vote and return the Shah's family to the rule. But it's not going to happen if the United States does not do a regime change on Iran. So it's not that he just wants a regime change operation on Iran. He wants to reinstall the Shah of Iran's son in the name of spreading democracy and freedom to Iran, just like we did to Afghanistan, just like we did to Vietnam, just like we did to Iraq. And you see what happened there. This is exactly the same propaganda, the exact same mentality, the exact same interest at work. Now, just to remind you, to say that I'm going to return democracy to Iran by reinstalling the regime of the Shah's family, of the Pahlavi regime and dynasty, is like saying, oh, I want to bring freedom and democracy to the world by making Mohammed bin Salman not just the head of Saudi Arabia, but of the entire world. The whole way that the Shah of Iran was installed in the first place was that the Iranians had a democratically elected government that the United States didn't and the West didn't like because it was becoming too nationalistic. It was threatening to nationalize oil reserves and use the proceeds for the benefit of the American people. The CIA overthrew that democratically elected government and planted one of the most brutal and savage dictators the world has ever seen, which is the Shah of Iran, who killed and murdered and put into prison every single dissident and ran that country with an iron fist until there was a revolution in 1979. That is what's really going on here. The reason people like Alan Dershowitz and the CIA in the West wanted to install the Shah and love the Shah and want to return the Shah into Iran isn't because they love democracy and want to spread democracy to the Middle East. It's because the Shah of Iran was a very close ally of Israel and a very close puppet, a very obedient puppet of the United States. And that is what this entire Middle East framework is about, is taking out the leaders who are democratically elected, making sure that the people of the Middle East have no say whatsoever by imposing dictators on those countries which we support and prop up, as we're doing in Saudi Arabia and Egypt and the United Arab Emirates and Qatar and Jordan. They want to turn the Middle East into all of that, where there's nothing but puppets of the United States that are very subservient to Israel. That is the real image, in his own words. He's saying what I really want is regime change, and I want to reinstall the Shah of Iran into that country in order to spread democracy. Now, let me just
pause for a second. This is a very important point here that Glenn makes, because we can argue the same thing about Gaddafi, right? Like Barack Obama made this claim that, well, Gaddafi is killing his own people, and no, Gaddafi wanted to move away from Western powers. Gaddafi wanted to basically make Africa a place where they didn't have to depend on any type of Western powers, right? So that is a no-no for the West. That's a no-no for the United States government. And not even just when he's talking about Iran, but all these other countries that the U.S. government has tried to overthrow their leaders. We talk about when it comes to Russia, you think the United States government wants Vladimir Putin in office? No, they want someone in office that is leading Russia that they can actually control. That's what they want. And if that person does not exist, they will create that person. Joe Biden told you himself many years ago, if there wasn't an Israel, we would create one. They want someone in there that's going to do their bidding, that is going to support and back Israel. And a lot of this goes back to oil and resources that are in the area. This is another reason why I continue to say we need to move away from our dependence on oil and some of these other resources. And that could stop a lot of these things. But as long as we are still depending on that, that isn't going to change anything. but the U.S. government wants to have control. You think the U.S. government wants regime change in Iran because they care about the Iranian people? They don't care about the Iranian people. They just want to have control over the resources. And their best way of having that is to make sure that Israel is the one that's in power, and all the other nations that are in the Middle East are aligned and support Israel as well.
Make a couple of points about a couple of the propagandistic visions that Professor Dershowitz presented. The first one is he wants you to think that we're right around the corner from having another Hitler, another Nazi Germany, and therefore you should make all your decisions based on what we wish we would have done prior to the emergence of Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. When I first stopped being a lawyer and began writing about politics in 2005, one of the very first things I noticed was how it seems like our pundit class, our policymaking class, our political class knows only one historical example. It's like they didn't learn anything about history except 1938, Neville Chamberlain, Winston Churchill, and the Nazis. And so everything they want you to believe always should be decided through the scope of the Nazis are coming, Hitler has returned. Now, there's a phrase in law, which I'm sure Professor Dershowitz at Harvard has taught his students, that says bad cases make bad law. In other words, if you're deciding everything based on some extreme case that's very uncommon, you're going to make very bad decisions for other cases that are more common. We have been told over the past 30 years that every single leader we want to go to war with is the new Hitler. We heard that about Saddam Hussein. We heard that about Ho Chi Minh. We heard that about Assad. We heard that about Gaddafi. We hear now that about Hamas, that Hamas is worse than the Nazis, or worse than ISIS. We've heard that about Muhammad Ahmadinejad, who, if you probably don't remember that Hitler, he was the one who left after serving 2 terms, which the Constitution required. This is the standard propagandistic framework they always tell to you to scare you into thinking that the new Hitler is about to come and therefore we have to take action. But what makes Hitler Hitler, what makes the Nazis Nazis, is that it was a singular evil, unlike things we've seen in history either before or since. And so to let our government or pundits or warmongers scare us all the time into believing that the new Hitler is coming, we're again facing Nazi Germany, is to make extremely bad decisions, always in favor of war, because of course, who wouldn't want to go kill Hitler before he became Hitler? And that's what they want you to think, but that's not actually what we're facing. Now, as far as the claim that, oh, well, we can't wait for proof because the only proof that we're going to have is when Iran finally gets the nuclear bomb, that should be very familiar to anybody above the age of 30, because that is what we were told before the Iraq War when people like Condoleezza Rice were asked, well, where's the evidence of all these nuclear weapons that you say Saddam Hussein has? She said, we can't wait for the proof to be in the form of a smoke cloud, of a nuclear cloud over the United States. So that was what they were saying was, oh, we don't have any evidence that Iran has nuclear weapons. We don't have any evidence that they're going to use them, but we can't wait. We have to do preventive war, which was a brand new concept for Iraq that he now wants to bring back for Iran. Prior to the war in Iraq, there was no such thing as preventive war. There was preemptive war, meaning if a country was on the verge of attacking you, you had the right to attack them. Obviously, Iraq wasn't on the verge of attacking the United States in 2002 and 2003, so they invented a new term called preventive war that allowed the United States to go into Iraq, one of the worst foreign policy disasters in the history of our country. And I would simply ask you whether you want to repeat that, because everything that he just got done saying is what we were told in 2002 and 2003 and so many other times.
Let's pause for a second. Yes, this is incredibly true. I remember the lie about the Iraq War. Remember how we were lied to. Saddam Hussein has weapons of mass destruction, which was a complete lie, but everybody bought it up. Maybe not everybody. There were some people who were protesting against the Iraq War, but I don't think people were as aware as they are now with foreign policy decisions, particularly when it comes to what's happening in Gaza. I think more people are aware. And I think that's what shocked a lot of our politicians, particularly the Biden administration. Remember what they said. They weren't prepared for this type of pushback towards the United States government giving Israel these weapons. They weren't prepared for that. They weren't prepared for all those protests. They didn't expect that to happen. But people have really woken up when it comes to foreign policy and the role that the U.S. government has to play in it. But again, to Glenn's point, we're hearing the same talking points all over again. We have to do this to protect democracy. First of all, a lot of these people can't even tell you what democracy really means. We don't even have true democracy in the United States. How do you have true democracy? And you can't even really, for the most part, depending on where you live, There are voting machines that don't even work right. If you're in an area that has voting machines, look at what they do to third-party candidates just to get on the ballot. A lot of these candidates are bought and paid for by Wall Street, the military-industrial complex, AIPAC, sometimes all three. So do we really have real democracy in this country? You don't even have a say, depending on what state you live in. You don't even have a say over your own body, depending on what state you live in. But we have a true democracy in this country, and people just aren't buying it anymore.
As well, including in Syria and in Libya. Now, it's not just Professor Dershowitz who wants regime change in Iran. It's also the government of Israel. We have this amazing coincidence in our foreign policy over the last 20 years that we keep getting told that we, the United States and Americans, have to go to war just totally coincidentally against all of Israel's worst enemies. So we went to war against Saddam Hussein, who Israel hated so much that they actually worked with and armed the Iranians in their war against Iraq. We tried to pull President Assad, Bashar al-Assad, out of Syria, who the Israelis saw as an extension of Iran. We ended up fighting on the same side as al-Qaeda and ISIS to do so. We failed. We left that country in complete destruction. We were told that we have to remove Gaddafi in Libya, even though we had partnered with him for so long, because he was one of the most pro-Palestinian voices in the region. We did actually remove Gaddafi from power, even though President Obama swore that the purpose of the war was simply to protect the people of Benghazi. It had nothing to do with regime change, and we got that leader out as well. So in 2021, according to the Times of Israel, it reported the following, quote, Defense Minister of Israel, Benny Gantz, and Mossad Chief David Barnera will push during their meetings this week in Washington with senior Biden administration officials for the United States to carry out a military strike on Iranian targets, Israel's three main TV news broadcasts reported Saturday night. So on some level, I would argue that just bombing Iran is not actually good for Israel's national security, but there's no world in which bombing Iran, which is what he wants our country to do, bomb Iran, having the United States bomb Iran, would actually benefit our national security as well. Now,
in fact, that would be absolutely insane. Alan Dershowitz wanting the U.S. government to bomb Iran, that would be absolutely insane and incredibly dangerous. Okay, because we know that Iran has powerful weapons. That is just bizarre. But that's how far gone Alan Dershowitz really is.
Let me just remind you of all the different times over the past, say, 20 years that we have heard over and over everything about Iran that Professor Dershowitz is trying to scare you into believing that they're just about to get nuclear weapons, they're weeks away, they're months away, we have to go bomb them. This is not something that only began recently. In fact, we've been hearing this exact same thing for 20 years and none of it ever came true. So you should decide tonight whether there's any reason after hearing this for 20 years, you're now suddenly willing to believe that Iran is on the verge of getting nuclear weapons to the point that we have to go start a new war with Iran.
This is what they do, guys, and we'll get back to Glenn. This is what they do. They find a way to make you fearful of that country. And then once you become fearful of it, when they start to, champion some type of war against them, then you're already approving of it because they have spent years trying to basically brainwash you into believing that we have to go after these countries without doing any research on your own, without trying to question what our government has been telling us, without questioning what mainstream media has been telling us. It is very important that we do our own research. And I've said this before, look up what I say too. Shit, I'm not perfect. Sometimes I come on here and I'm like, oh yeah, by the way, I have to correct something. So as long as they can make you afraid, as long as they can make you fearful, then it's a lot easier to convince you to support the U.S. government starting these wars. But if they can't convince you, that means that they haven't made you afraid of that country. And that's something that I think scares them the most. The fact that you may actually start to think for yourself.
Jeffrey Goldberg who's the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic and a strong supporter of Israel, wrote a cover story for The Atlantic called The Point of No Return in 2010, where he told Americans it was more than 50% likely that the Israelis were about to go bomb Iran in the next 3 months because they didn't have more than months before Iran finally acquired a nuclear weapon. You can go all the way back to 2005, where NBC News reported the following. This is 2005, 20 years ago, quote, Israel should take, quote, bold and courageous action against arch-foe Iran's nuclear program, similar to its 1981 strike on the main Iraqi reactor, former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said on Sunday. Israeli officials have said that unless stopped, Iran will achieve the know-how to build a bomb by March of next year. In 2010, Jeffrey Goldberg said, based on my conversations with Israeli decision makers, in Israel, we heard this as 9 months from June. In other words, March of 2011, that's all Israel has. If we assume that nothing changes in these estimates, this will mean we have to begin thinking about our next step beginning at the turn of the year. The New York Times in 2012, President Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel told the UN that Iran's capability to enrich uranium must be stopped before next spring or early summer, arguing that by the time the country will be in a position to make a short, undetectable sprint to manufacture nuclear weapons. Reuters in 2015, CBS in 2018, BBC in 2019, all say exactly the same thing. Oh, we're only months away. We have for sure these intelligence photos with a big red arrow pointing at some random building that we have discovered is where Iran is about to proliferate their nuclear weapons. It's been happening over and over that you've been lied to for 20 years. Why would you suddenly believe it and support a new war against a country that's 3 times as large as Iraq, risking all of the major escalation and instability and huge war that we know will happen?
I said the same thing when the war with Russia and Ukraine started. I was just like, is no one going to question what the U.S. government is telling us, what the media is telling us? At the beginning, at the start of this, the media wasn't even talking about what happened in 2014. They weren't talking about the fact that this was basically a proxy war brought on by NATO. This is exactly what the U.S. government wanted to happen. They want people like Vladimir Putin out of power. They want Russia to be, I guess, in a way, neutralized. Same thing with China. Why do you think they're trying to provoke China? These are 2 countries that economically are competitors for the United States, and the United States government does not want that. So they try to find ways to provoke. Nancy Pelosi going to Taiwan is provoking China. Ed Markey going to Taiwan when Taiwan is asking for independence, even though we have a one China policy rule, is provoking China. So they do these things that a lot of times you just don't hear about on mainstream media because they don't make it a headline. And then Americans are surprised, like, oh my God, we're at conflict with this country now. When a lot of times we're the ones that are provoking it.
Now, if you want Iran not to build a nuclear weapon, there is a very easy way to do that, which is to signal to them that the safest way for them to reintegrate into the international community is by agreeing not to build a nuclear weapon in exchange for having sanctions lifted. That was the Iran deal that President Obama did in 2015. And according to the Congressional Research Service, in April of 2024, just a month ago, when he was telling Newsmax what he really wants is a regime change in Iran, they documented how during the entire Iran deal, when sanctions were lifted, Iran never took any steps to build a nuclear weapon beyond what they were allowed to do. They had everything open to inspectors. They were always doing exactly what that agreement called for. And it was only once that deal was terminated, which the Israelis and many Israel supporters in the United States urged President Trump to do, did we begin again hearing that they were close to nuclear weapons. The 1981 example that he cites often about when Israel bombed Saddam Hussein and the Iraqi reactor is the perfect example. Prior to 1981, there was almost no evidence Saddam Hussein had an active nuclear program. It was a very vague aspiration. What drove Iraq to try and get nuclear weapons was precisely the fact that Israel attacked them. That's the message we send to the world all the time.
Once again, who was the aggressor? So you see, even with that particular situation, Israel was the aggressor. Let's get to the part here where Dershowitz responds. Let's go ahead and bring Alan Dershowitz in here. Let me back up just a little bit.
Seven and a half minutes of rebuttal. 7.5 minutes of rebuttal from Alan Dershowitz. Take it away, Alan.
Watch this. So he forgot to pick up the mic.
Israel succeeded in its attacks on both the Iraqi and the Syrian nuclear reactors with minimal casualties, and neither Syria nor Iraq has continued to develop nuclear weapons. The Middle East is a lot safer because of Israel's surgical attacks, careful attacks, very, very cautious attacks on both Iraq and Syria's nuclear reactors.
To answer that question, I don't know. Tyblee, why isn't he standing? I was wondering the same thing. I'm not sure. I know Glenn went up to the podium. I don't know why he's not standing up.
I would love to see Israel be able to cooperate with Iran and work out a deal and try to avoid them getting nuclear weapons or a nuclear arsenal without an attack. That would be far, far better. But it's just not going to happen. And there are some very, very thoughtful people who now honestly believe that Iran is just months away from having a nuclear arsenal and enough bombs to destroy Israel. And
so here comes the fear mongering, folks. So here's Alan Dershowitz trying to make people afraid that Iran is going to try to get these weapons so that they can destroy Israel. Question for you, Alan. If this Iron Dome is so effective that you say that it is, why are you concerned? I thought this Iron Dome can hold up and stop anything, right? Apparently not. 2, I highly doubt that. I think that if Iran wanted to do that, they would have done that by now. Don't you guys think they would have already done that? Listen to the way that he is framing this. Here comes the fear mongering, trying to make you afraid that this is something that Iran is planning to do. Iran was pretty public about their intentions, right? After Israel again hit the Iranian embassy in Damascus, again, Israel was the aggressor. So Alan Dershowitz, what he seems to think is okay, and a lot of Zionists think this is okay, that Israel can just continue to poke the bear. They can always hit first, but they don't want you to hit back. So Israel is the kid on the playground that wants to punch you and run away. But the moment you try to fight back and they punch you and you decide to slap them or knock them the fuck out, you're the problem. Israel is the bully on the playground that cries when you hit them back.
Of course, we know that Iran operates through surrogates. It operates through far less responsible organizations such as Hamas and Hezbollah and the Houthis and others. And the idea that any of them would get nuclear weapons is so potentially disturbing to world peace that it's worth at least considering what the realistic options are. If Iran does develop a nuclear arsenal, it will change everything in the Middle East. It will change everything in the world. And remember, because Iran is a theocracy, which bases its decisions on the leaders of the Ayatollah, a kind of cataclysmic approach, which focuses more on the world to come than on this world, is not beyond the realm of dispute. And the question is a question of probabilities. Nobody knows for absolute certain. Nobody knows with any degree of prophecy. You know, the Bible says that, or the Talmud says the prophecy ended with the destruction of the Second Temple. And so we're left with a world of probabilities. And one has to ask what the worst probabilities are. And
why are we referring to biblical text or, you know, whatever type of religious text that you believe in? Why are we using that as a reference for debate? You know, when I participated in debate in high school, we were not allowed to use religion to support our argument. There were a couple of things you could not do, but one that I remember specifically was religion. Religion is a belief. And some people may not like to hear that, but religion is a belief. It's what you believe. So Alan Dershowitz should not be using religious text to back his argument. That goes to show you just how much Glenn basically demolished him with his own argument. Whenever you have to resort back to, well, you know, the Talmud says, or such and such says this in the book, that is a belief. You don't know that to be fact. And people, you can fight me on this. I grew up in the church, but the reality is you do not know that to be fact.
And the question is, what would be worse? A preventive attack on a nascent Iranian a nuclear arsenal, or leaving it alone and allowing Iran to develop a nuclear arsenal, which would change everything in the Middle East. You know, we heard my distinguished opponent talk about how many times Israel thought about bombing Iran, but they've never done it. They've never done it, not because they didn't have the capacity to do it, but they were waiting for a much higher level of certainty. And
oh, so you speak for Iran now, Dershowitz? You know so much about how they feel and what they wanted. I love this, Saul. We're giving you shout out here. Saul said Glenn is doing his taxes.
much higher ability to do to Iran what they did to Iraq and Syria, and that is to destroy the nuclear potential without endangering civilians. For example, in Iraq, I think one civilian died. An Egyptian who was not, I'm sorry, a French technician who was not supposed to be at the Osiris reactor. It was on a Saturday or something like that, or a Friday when they were supposed to be home, and accidentally he was there. And if it didn't totally destroy, it set back the Iraqi nuclear program for many years. In fact, it's never been renewed again. And so it is a question of probabilities. And yes, I favor regime change in Iran. Iran is the most dangerous country in the modern world.
No, that would be Israel, hon. Everybody's dangerous except for the countries that the U.S. tells you that are not. Iran is dangerous. Russia's dangerous. China's dangerous. You know, anyone that doesn't go along with this puppetry of the United States government is considered to be dangerous. You know, at one point they were like, Saddam was dangerous. Iraq is dangerous. Everything the U.S. tells you is dangerous. But the United States is never dangerous, even though they have implemented coups in other countries. The countries they tell you to be afraid of, like Venezuela. The United States government implemented coups in Venezuela. Anya Parampil wrote a whole book about it. Go read it. So there's that. Haiti's dangerous. Oh no, there's gangs in Haiti. Watch out for Haiti. It's dangerous. We have to do something now. Everyone's dangerous except for Israel and the United States government. Israel has led an assault on a population of people, an ethnic assault on a population of people. And for all the rhetoric that comes out of Netanyahu's mouth, he has no room to really talk. Netanyahu isn't even from there. He's a settler. Make it clear, folks. That's not even his name. Richie Medhurst did a whole video about this. That's not his name. He changed his name so that you would think he grew up there. He didn't grow up there. So everybody's dangerous except for the settler nation. Make it make sense.
It is the modern day Nazi Germany, and the potential for Iran using its aggressive behavior, which it now assigns to surrogates, and doing it in a more direct, effective way. Remember that Iran sent hundreds of missiles to Israel just a few weeks ago. Imagine if a half a dozen of them were nuclear tipped. Every country has the right of self-defense, and regime change would be good for the vast majority of Iranians want regime change. The only reason there is Ayatollah regime in Iran is because it's a despotic regime. It's the furthest thing in the world from democracy. And so if the Iranian regime could be changed, look, I don't want the Shah, I don't want anybody close to the Shah to be the leader of Iran, but you have to choose between evils, and you have to choose the lesser of the evils. And I have to tell you, the Iranian regime was less bad on a scale of really bad under the Shah of Iran, and it would be much, much less bad under his far more liberal and far more accommodating son.
So let's pause there and we'll get to Glenn's rebuttal here in just a second. It's funny, it does look like Glenn is doing his taxes. But anyway, one thing that I wanted to add in reference to what he said about the nuclear weapons, notice how this is framed as well. Because you see, Alan Dershowitz isn't against Israel having any type of nuclear weapons. It's only other countries that they feel should not have them that are particularly not aligned with Israel and the United States government. So it's a problem for Russia to have them. It's a problem for Iran to have them, but it's not a problem for Israel to have them. I say the best way that you can solve this argument is to get rid of all nuclear weapons, period. We shouldn't have nuclear weapons at all, because they are incredibly dangerous. But you don't get to pick and choose. If you do have them, you don't get to pick and choose which country can happen, what countries can't have them. That's dangerous. Let's fast forward to the piece here where Glenn comes in with the rebuttal right about here. Yeah.
And the action that I advocate we should take.
Thank you, Professor. Yeah.
Yeah, so again, I wonder why he has to...
7.5 minutes from Glenn. Take it away, Glenn.
Yeah, so Glenn stands up at the podium. I don't know why Dershowitz is not standing up. I don't know.
So one of the first things that I noticed Professor Dershowitz saying near the beginning of his rebuttal there was, well, it would be nice to have an agreement with Iran, but unfortunately, it will never happen. And I thought that was so odd because it actually did happen, not 100 years ago, but 7 years ago. It was the Iran deal that the United States and Western Europe entered into with Iran to reintegrate Iran into the international community in exchange for Iran opening up its nuclear facilities. Think about what you would think if you were a leader. Would you want nuclear weapons more if you felt like you were in danger of being bombed and attacked and having people like Alan Dershowitz talking for the last 20 years about how important it is to bomb you within the next few weeks? Wouldn't you think, oh, I better get nuclear weapons? And wouldn't you feel like maybe you don't need nuclear weapons if you're actually entering deals that you don't renege on, but that the United States did? So that was a deal. And I read you the Congressional Service Report that said during the time of that deal, there was no movement at all on Iran's nuclear program. In fact, this is from the Brookings Institution, which supported the war in Iraq, has always supported multiple wars in the Middle East. And this is what they say in December 2021, why bombing Iran is still a bad idea. Quote, retired Israeli General Isaac Ben Israel told Bloomberg that, quote, Netanyahu's efforts to persuade the Trump administration to quit the nuclear agreement with Iran has turned out to be the worst strategic mistake in Israel's history. With this statement, General Ben Israel admitted that not only did Israel undermine its own security by pushing for Trump to renege on the agreement, but also that Israel undermined America's security, as both countries share an interest in preventing Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon. Such behavior is unacceptable from a partner. Unfortunately, Iran's current minister, Naftali Bennett, is adopting much of the same posture on Iran as Netanyahu. And here's what they say will happen if you vote for bombing Iran. Quote, an Israeli strike on Iran or a U.S. strike on Iran, quote, will likely start a conflict that pulls in neighboring countries on both sides. Hezbollah will launch thousands of rockets, missiles, and drones at Haifa, Tel Aviv, and other targets. Hamas might also join the conflict. Iran or its Iraqi and Yemeni partners could strike Saudi Arabia as they have in the past. They might also expand attacks to include Bahrain and the United Arab Emirates, given their now publicly normalized ties with Israel. Oman, Kuwait, and Qatar, which have tended to maintain relations with both Israel and the rest of the United States, will be pressed to choose a side, a decision that will subject them to attack from their new adversaries. Jordan would be in a grave bind, given the enormous popular pressure to break the peace treaty with Israel. Oil prices would skyrocket. Does that sound like something we all want? This conflagration in the Middle East of the kind we saw when the people who said the same thing about Iraq got their way? Now, again, Professor Dershowitz returned to this idea that, oh, the Iranians are Nazis. I guess, I don't know if Assad is still the new Hitler. I don't know if Gaddafi's still the new Hitler. If Ahmadinejad, who was not even part of Iran's government anymore, is the new Hitler. I don't know if Putin is the new Hitler. But Iran, he says, is the real new Nazis, and you have to treat them that way. What evidence is there that Iran is some crazy apocalyptic country that goes around murdering and slaughtering and committing genocide? They have certainly done bad acts, and Professor Dershowitz went over them. But the death count responsible that the United States and Israel is responsible for dwarfs whatever number of people Iran has killed.
This is very important right here. This piece that Glenn is saying is very important because at the end of the day, when you think about it, I told you, they continue to pick on a population of people that has actually done less harm than Israel has done. They blame Hamas for the greatest atrocity in the world that happened on October 7th. Meanwhile, Israel's killed over 4,000 people and thousands of children. But that's not a great atrocity because Israel did it, right? So he blames Iran. Dershowitz blames Iran and says, oh, no, they're basically the new Hitler, da, da, da. I don't remember Iran committing ethnic genocide, trying to, cleanse like an entire group of people. I don't remember those things happening. This is not to say Iran is innocent, but I don't remember them doing these things. Meanwhile, you have Israel actively trying to ethnically cleanse the land. So again, what I've noticed time and time over and over again when it comes to Zionism is that a lot of times these accusations that they make against other populations, it's actually what they're doing. Everyone, pay attention to it.
Iran has shown over and over that they can be rationally negotiated with. They're not some crazed apocalyptic cult. When Israel bombed their embassy in Syria, they didn't go all out and try and attack Israel the way many countries would. They used some of their slowest and most harmless drones that they knew would be intercepted as a show of symbolic force. There's no evidence that Iran is out there invading other countries, bombing other countries, trying to bring a genocide or a new Holocaust. In fact, in 2018, there was a UN General Assembly resolution that simply called for the, quote, establishment of a nuclear weapon-free zone in the region of the Middle East. All 171 countries voted in favor of a nuclear-free Middle East. You'll never guess which were the only two no votes in the entire world. Oh, it's the U.S. and Israel.
Because the U.S. and Israel wants to be the ones in power. That is why. You can watch the rest of this debate on Reason on YouTube. Glenn Greenwald and Alan Dershowitz debate bombing Iran. I think there's one more piece. There was one more discussion here. Do I have it? Yes, this part. I did share this one on Twitter where I said Glenn Greenwald is destroying Alan Dershowitz in this debate. Listen to this one. This is where Glenn calls out the media. This is good.
That Iran did not want to kill Israelis, that it sent these hundreds of drones knowing they would all be miraculously stopped. Can you justify that?
Yeah, what I want to say is if Iran has such a primitive army that they're not capable of landing even a single missile inside Israel because all they have is a bunch of crappy drones and slow missiles that can be removed from the sky by Jordan and by the United Arab Emirates, then they're hardly an imposing country. The reality is that Hezbollah...
All you need is one to get through.
Alan, please.
One.
Hezbollah has hundreds of, tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of highly sophisticated missiles pointed directly at every single major Israeli city, including Tel Aviv. If Iran wanted to do a kind of response against Israel that you're suggesting they wanted, they had that capability and they didn't because they're a rational, restrained country that didn't want to end up in a world war. I know. The only rational, restrained countries are America, Israel, and the West. That's what your media tells you all the time, so I know that you believe that.
But there are actually other rational, restrained countries in the world too. You're always told there's a new Hitler in Iran, there's a new Hitler in Russia, there's a new Hitler named Hamas, there's a new Hitler in Syria, and you believe it all the time, and you stand up and you cheer all those evil, irrational countries. As I said, if you look at who the ones are who are starting wars, it is your country, the United States, and along with Israel as well. And that is just the reality if you remove yourself from Western propaganda.
So he related it to the media, and that's very important. And I'll tell you something else in reference to so-and-so is the new Hitler. Notice you didn't hear the media say that about Ukraine, even though there was actually a letter that was signed by Congress members in Congress in 2018. Look this up, April 2018, congressional members, one of them being Ro Khanna, signed this letter saying that they were very concerned about the Nazification in Ukraine and Poland. So put two and two together, folks. So when the war happens with Russia and Ukraine, and Russia talks about the Nazification in Ukraine, notice that mainstream media didn't even want to tell you about the Nazification in the Azov Battalion, but not that it's just with the Azov Battalion, but also that it's throughout the freaking country. This is something that some people on the left got wrong. They got it wrong from day one because there were personalities that they didn't like. And so they were like, well, I don't want to agree with that person, instead of looking into that information itself. For the people who told you it was just a small amount of people that were, no, it is embedded in the culture. Embedded in the culture. And I know this, having had students who were from Ukraine that explained this to me. Okay. But you'll never hear mainstream media. They didn't want to tell you that, though. So if they're telling you that there is a rise of a new Hitler for another country, chances are it's probably not that country. And the countries that they're cheerleading, maybe those are the ones that you should look a little bit deeper into. But Glenn killed him.